There comes a moment in the life of every human being where quitting would be easier. Your muscles ache, your mind rebels, your vision narrows to the problems in front of you, and everything in you whispers, stop. But what you may not realize is this is the moment this is when transformation becomes possible. We are not just creatures of emotion. We are systems of potential governed by principles far deeper than motivation. The act of continuing, especially when it's hardest, is not just a psychological victory. It's biological. Every time you push forward despite resistance, your brain takes note. Synapses fire, connections strengthen. Circuits of courage, willpower, and clarity are laid down brick by brick through effort. Effort is not a punishment. It is a tool. And dopamine, that much discussed molecule, isn't released only when you achieve something. It's released when you lean into the struggle. You don't need to finish the race to feel reward. You need to take the next step and mean it. You must rewire what you celebrate. Learn to love the burn in your lungs, the resistance in your legs, the heaviness in your mind, because those sensations are not signs of failure. They are signals of growth. They are biochemical feedback that the system is adapting. And yes, it will hurt, but pain is not a stop sign. It's data. Use it, interpret it, harness it. You have control through breath, through posture, through how you focus your eyes. You can regulate the stress response. You are not at the mercy of your body. You are the commander of it. You must stop waiting for the perfect conditions. Perfect mood, a perfect plan. Purpose does not emerge when things are easy. It awakens when things are hard. And the mind will scream for safety, for escape, for comfort. That is not weakness. It's wiring. But it is wiring you can override. That is your divine advantage. Neuroplasticity is activity dependent. This means that the brain doesn't change because we want it to. It changes because of what we do. It's one of the most powerful truths in neuroscience and human transformation. You cannot merely think your way into a new mindset. The brain reshapes itself in direct response to repeated intentional behaviors and the patterns of activity you engage in. Where you direct your focus, what you repeat, and how much effort you apply. These things sculpt the physical structure and function of your brain. This isn't philosophy. It's biology. Neurons that fire together wire together. The more often a neural circuit is activated, the stronger it becomes. Like a trail in the woods, the more you walk it, the clearer and more automatic it becomes. That's why habits feel automatic. They're encoded into the architecture of your nervous system. But what's often missed is that those changes only occur when action is taken under real conditions, when it's hard, when there is resistance, when you push yourself out of the familiar. If you want to become someone who perseveres, you must train your nervous system to recognize effort as a cue for growth, not as a signal to stop. Every time you resist distraction and return your attention to the task, you're rewiring your brain for focus. Every time you override the impulse to quit and take one more step, one more rep, one more hard conversation, you're carving new pathways into the motor and prefrontal circuits that govern discipline and executive function. The brain adapts not because you are interested, but because you engaged. Attention, repetition, and emotional intensity, that's the formula for neuroplastic change. But here's what's profound. The most potent plasticity occurs at the edge of your capabilities. Not in the comfort zone, but in the friction zone, where you are stretched, fatigued, and uncertain. When you force yourself to keep going in that zone, you're sending a signal to the brain. This is important. Adapt to this. That signal, reinforced over time, leads to lasting rewiring. It's not just about learning new information. It's about becoming neurologically different. You're shaping your future self with every single choice to persist under strain. Even failures play a critical role here. When mistakes are followed by reflection and correction, the circuits involved in error detection, learning, and behavioral change become more refined. So the process of falling down and getting up again isn't wasted energy, it's essential. The key is repetition with deliberate awareness. It's not enough to just go through the motions. Your brain needs to know this matters. That's why urgency and intention are vital ingredients. When you bring focus to a task, especially under difficulty, you're flooding your system with neuromodulators like acetylcholine and norepinephrine that enhance synaptic changes. Those chemicals act like spotlight and glue. They mark the circuits for change and lock in the rewiring. It also means you are never stuck. No matter how long you've operated in fear, procrastination, or doubt, your brain remains malleable. Neuroplasticity doesn't close in adulthood. It just requires more deliberate effort. But the capacity is still there. And the question is not, can you change? It's will you act in a way that forces change? Your biology will match your behavior. There's no shortcut around this. You must do the hard thing again and again until your nervous system stops resisting and starts adapting. What was once unfamiliar becomes second nature. What was once uncomfortable becomes your new baseline. And in that process, you don't just learn a new skill, you become a new version of yourself, built from the inside out by the work you chose to do. So, dopamine is commonly misunderstood as the pleasure chemical, something the brain releases only when we achieve a goal, win an award, or receive praise. But that's only part of the story. In truth, dopamine's most powerful role is not in the moment of reward, but in the pursuit of it. It is the driver of effort, a neurochemical that signals anticipation, motivates action, and sustains goal-directed behavior, especially when things are hard. Understanding this changes everything about how we relate to work, discipline, and personal growth. Discipline. When you set your sights on a goal, whether that's finishing a workout, writing a page, or showing up on time, dopamine levels begin to rise. It creates a sense of desire, not just for the reward itself, but for the process of attaining it. This forward-directed drive is fundamental. It helps bridge the gap between intention and action. The challenge is that most people only associate dopamine with the end result, which trains the brain to feel flat, distracted, or unmotivated during the journey. They feel something's wrong when it gets hard. But difficulty is not a sign of failure. It's a necessary part of engaging the dopamine system in a meaningful way. One of the most powerful shifts you can make is to learn to attach dopamine not to the reward, but to the effort itself. When you start telling yourself, this strain means I'm growing, or this is the kind of discomfort that shapes people, you are literally reassigning where dopamine lands in your experience. You begin to release it during the act of doing the work, not just at the finish line. And because dopamine is involved in reinforcing behavior, this makes it far more likely that you will repeat that behavior again in the future. You are training your brain to seek the challenge, not flee from it. Dopamine release also interacts with the level of perceived control and meaning behind a task. When your goal is aligned with your purpose, or even when you just choose to take ownership of it, dopamine amplifies. This is why forced tasks feel dull and self-directed ones feel more engaging. It's not just about the task itself, it's about how your brain interprets it. When you can reframe the experience as something that builds you, something that contributes to who you want to become, dopamine helps carry you through fatigue, boredom, and resistance. There is also a feedback loop here. The more you learn to find satisfaction in effort, the more dopamine you release during effort, and the more your brain associates effort with reward. This begins to shift your identity. You go from being someone who tolerates difficulty to someone who seeks it out, because that's where growth happens. Your neural circuits start to reflect this too. Areas in the brain involved in motivation, focus, and planning begin to synchronize and fire more efficiently. You don't just feel more driven, you become more capable of sustained pursuit. It's important to realize that dopamine is not infinite. Overstimulating it with short-term rewards, like scrolling sugar or mindless entertainment, can blunt its effectiveness. When dopamine is spiked too frequently without effort, the brain adapts by lowering baseline levels. That's when people start to feel apathetic, unmotivated, or numb. The system stops responding unless the stimulus is extreme. That's why it's crucial to preserve dopamine sensitivity by reserving it for effortful pursuits. When you earn dopamine through challenge, not shortcuts, it stays powerful. You can train this. You can choose to say, I enjoy this difficulty and mean it. Not because it's easy, but because you understand what it's doing inside you. You're not chasing comfort anymore. You're building a brain that thrives in pursuit. And once you've done that, momentum becomes your ally. You no longer need external motivation. Dopamine becomes internally generated, driving you not just toward results, but through the process that makes you resilient, focused, and free. Deliberate cold exposure of the mind refers to the intentional practice of placing yourself in mentally uncomfortable, effortful, or emotionally straining situations. not to punish yourself, but to build resilience and rewire the nervous system. Just as physical cold exposure trains the body to regulate stress, mental cold exposure conditions the brain to remain calm, focused, and in control under pressure. This isn't about reckless endurance or masochism. It's a controlled, systematic challenge to your internal state, one that reshapes how you respond to adversity. The brain does not grow from ease. It adapts to what it repeatedly experiences, and most of the modern world trains us to avoid anything unpleasant. Whether that's difficult conversations, solitude, boredom, or prolonged focus. Over time, this avoidance weakens the circuits responsible for impulse control, cognitive endurance, and emotional regulation. Deliberate cold exposure of the mind is a way of reversing that trend. It means choosing on purpose to do things that make you uncomfortable, not to break you down, but to build you up from the inside. Neuroscience shows that when you expose yourself to controlled mental discomfort, regions like the prefrontal cortex become more engaged. This is the area responsible for planning, reflection, and overriding impulses. When you're in a difficult moment, perhaps pushing through physical exertion, resisting the urge to quit, or tolerating social discomfort, your limbic system, the emotional brain, sends signals of distress. But when you practice staying in that state without immediately escaping it, your prefrontal cortex strengthens its influence. You train your brain to say, yes, this is hard, but I am not ruled by that. That repetition is how you forge inner discipline. This type of training doesn't require extreme conditions. It can be something as simple as holding a difficult pose during a workout, sitting still in silence for longer than is comfortable, finishing a boring but necessary task without distraction, or delaying gratification when the reward is right in front of you. What matters is not the content of the challenge, but the voluntary engagement with discomfort. When you choose the cold instead of waiting for life to throw it at you, you build confidence. You're proving to yourself that you can enter the arena and remain composed. One of the key neurochemical dynamics at play during these moments is the regulation of norepinephrine. This chemical increases alertness and focus, but also contributes to the sensation of mental strain. By entering a stressful mental state deliberately and staying there without panicking, you teach your system to release norepinephrine in a more controlled way. Over time, your threshold for mental stress increases. You can think more clearly, act more calmly, and endure more pressure without crumbling. That's not a personality trait. It's a trainable neural adaptation. Another critical shift happens in how you relate to the sensation of discomfort itself. At first, the brain interprets discomfort as a threat. It wants to run, but with repeated exposure, something remarkable happens. The same discomfort is now perceived as tolerable, even valuable. You begin to crave it, not because it's pleasant, but because it signals growth. This shift is transformational. Discomfort becomes a cue for progress rather than pain. Your relationship with fear, procrastination, and resistance fundamentally changes. This practice also builds what psychologists call distress tolerance. It's not just about enduring pain, it's about maintaining function in the presence of that pain. The best athletes, thinkers, and performers in the world are not free of stress. They're trained to operate in spite of it, And this ability isn't born. It's built through thousands of small, deliberate moments of mental cold exposure. Each time you resist the urge to escape, to numb out, or to quit when it gets hard, you are rewiring your brain. You are saying to your nervous system, we can handle this. Might, you can handle this. Over time, the system believes you. And when real challenges hit, the ones you didn't choose, you'll already be ready because you trained in the cold. Top-down control from the prefrontal cortex is the process by which the rational, executive part of the brain regulates emotions, impulses, and behaviors that arise from more primitive brain structures. The prefrontal cortex, located behind the forehead, is responsible for planning, decision-making, self-control, and future-oriented thinking. When you're in a state of challenge or discomfort, mental, emotional, or physical, it is this region of the brain that allows you to override automatic reactions and choose a more deliberate response. This function is not fixed at birth. It is trainable, plastic, and responsive to repeated intentional effort. When the brain encounters stress, threat, or fatigue, it naturally defaults to survival circuits in the limbic system, especially the amygdala. These regions are fast reactive and focused on immediate outcomes. Avoid pain, seek comfort, protect the self. They are not concerned with long-term goals, values, or meaning. If left unchecked, these impulses can drive behaviors that sabotage progress, quitting too soon, avoiding hard conversations, lashing out in anger, or retreating into distraction. But the prefrontal cortex has the unique ability to step in and modulate these reactions. It can assess whether an impulse serves your highest aim, and if it doesn't, it can choose a different path. This is not just theory. It is observable in brain imaging. When people exert willpower or maintain focus in difficult situations, the prefrontal cortex lights up and communicates with emotional centers to dampen reactivity. The key is this: top-down control is not automatic. It must be activated, and it takes energy. Especially when you're tired, overwhelmed, or afraid, it feels easier to let the older parts of the brain take over. That's why training the prefrontal cortex through intentional action is essential. Full. Every time you resist a temptation, regulate your tone in a moment of frustration, or stay on task despite boredom, you are strengthening the neural pathways between the prefrontal cortex and other regions of the brain. The more you practice this, the faster and more efficiently those pathways operate. Over time, self-control stops feeling like such a strain. It becomes a skill. This is not about suppressing emotion. It's about regulating emotion so that it serves you rather than rules you. When you practice top-down control, you still feel the anger, the fear, the exhaustion, but you choose not to be dominated by them. You pause, you breathe. You ask, what is the right action here? That pause is powerful. It's where the prefrontal cortex shines. In that gap between stimulus and response lies the ability to shape your behavior, to move toward purpose instead of simply reacting from survival. One of the ways to enhance this control is through practices that demand sustained attention and restraint. Delayed gratification, cold exposure, deep work, fasting, high-intensity training. All of these place the brain in situations where the immediate impulse must be overridden in favor of long-term benefit. They challenge the prefrontal cortex to stay online under pressure. Each repetition is like a repetition in the gym. You are strengthening cognitive endurance, which spills over into other domains of life. It becomes easier to have discipline with your words, with your time, with your focus, because your brain has been trained to hold the line when things get difficult. Neurochemically, this process is supported by the release of certain modulators like dopamine, norepinephrine, and serotonin. When the prefrontal cortex engages successfully in moments of challenge, dopamine reinforces that behavior as valuable. Over time, the brain learns effort equals reward. The circuits that make persistence possible become more active and more automatic. Eventually, top-down control becomes more than a momentary decision. It becomes a trait. You stop living by default and start living by design. You move from being reactive to becoming proactive. And that shift, choosing who you want to be in the midst of pressure, changes everything. The way you use your eyes and breath plays a direct and powerful role in regulating your internal state. These are not abstract ideas. They are physiological levers hardwired into the brain and body that allow you to shift from states of stress, overwhelm, or distraction into calm, focused, and high-performing modes. The nervous system is not a passive responder to emotion. It is an active participant in shaping it. And vision and breath are two of the fastest, most accessible ways to influence how you feel and how you function in any given moment. Your eyes are not just for seeing. They are part of your central nervous system, connected directly to brain regions responsible for attention, arousal, and emotional regulation. When you're stressed, anxious, or locked in fear, your visual field narrows. You go into what's called foval vision, a tight tunnel-like gaze designed for detecting threats and reacting quickly. While useful in acute danger, this state is counterproductive when you need to think clearly, plan, or persist through long-term effort. By contrast, when you intentionally widen your gaze, taking in more of the peripheral environment without moving your head, you signal safety to the brain. This broad panoramic vision reduces activity in the amygdala and other stress centers and promotes activation of the parasympathetic nervous system. In other words, it calms you down and expands your cognitive capacity. Simply by lifting your gaze from your screen, relaxing your forehead, and expanding your visual field, you change your internal chemistry. The brain, interprets the message as we are not in immediate danger and adjusts your physiological state accordingly. It's a low effort, high impact tool that can be used before a performance, during a moment of stress, or even in daily transitions between activities. Elite performers, special operations personnel, and athletes use this to reset their nervous systems quickly, and it's something anyone can practice. Quinn. Breathing offers a similarly direct line of access to the brain and body. It is unique among autonomic functions because it can be both unconscious and consciously controlled. This means that although your breathing often happens automatically, you can intervene at any moment and deliberately change your breath pattern to alter your state. The connection between breath and state is bidirectional. When you're stressed, your breathing becomes shallow and rapid. But when you intentionally slow and deepen your breathing, especially on the exhale, you engage the vagus nerve, which activates the parasympathetic system and reduces the physiological markers of stress. One of the most effective tools in this domain is the physiological sigh, a double inhale through the nose, followed by a long, extended exhale through the mouth. This breathing pattern has been shown to reduce carbon dioxide buildup in the lungs and signal to the brain that it's safe to downshift. Just 1 or 2 rounds of this breath can reduce heart rate, lower cortisol, and improve clarity of thought. It doesn't take 5 minutes. It takes about 15 seconds, and it's biologically hardwired into you. Animals do it. Children do it. You can do it. You can do it at any time. The pairing of vision and breath gives you real-time control over your state, whether you need to ramp up for focus or downshift into calm. These tools are levers you can pull. They don't require belief. They require practice. With repetition, the neural pathways involved in conscious state regulation become more efficient. You become better at catching yourself when your state starts to shift into chaos, and more skilled at steering it back towards centeredness. What this means ultimately is that you are not at the mercy of how you feel. You are not stuck in overwhelm or fatigue. You have tools. And when you use your eyes and breath deliberately, you begin to master the interface between body and mind. You stop waiting to feel better and start acting in ways that make you better on command. Stress is not always the enemy. In fact, it is one of the most potent tools for growth and adaptation when properly understood and deliberately harnessed. The nervous system is designed to respond to challenges. It's how we learn, improve, and strengthen both body and mind. Stress in its acute form is the body's signal that something important is happening. It heightens awareness, mobilizes energy, and focuses attention. When channeled wisely, it becomes a source of momentum rather than a barrier. What matters is not whether stress occurs, but how we interpret and respond to it. The brain does not process stress in isolation. It filters it through perception. If a challenging situation is viewed as a threat, the stress response becomes maladaptive, triggering anxiety, paralysis, and escape behaviors. But if the same challenge is viewed as an opportunity to grow, to improve, or to prove something to oneself, the brain recruits an entirely different set of chemicals and pathways. Cortisol may still rise, but it does so alongside epinephrine and dopamine, which increase motivation and sharpen focus, This is called a challenge response, and it fundamentally changes how stress affects the body. In neuroscience, this interplay between perception and physiology is well documented. Stress activates the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal HPA axis, initiating a cascade of hormonal responses. When chronic or uncontrolled, this can damage health, but short-term, well-regulated stress enhances neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself in response to experience. Stress makes the nervous system more alert to feedback and more responsive to correction. It's in these conditions, high effort, high stakes, high attention, that some of the most durable learning occurs. This is why elite athletes and top performers deliberately place themselves in high-stress environments. They know it sharpens the system and accelerates adaptation. So the key then is not to avoid stress, but to develop the capacity to engage with it skillfully. This begins with reframing. When you feel the surge of adrenaline or the quickening of your breath, you can tell yourself, this is my body preparing me to rise to the occasion. That shift in interpretation sends a very different message to the brain. Instead of spiraling into panic or resistance, you lean in. You harness the energy instead of fighting it. This is not wishful thinking. It's a real-time recalibration of neural processing. Your beliefs about stress directly influence its physiological effects. Another crucial point is the concept of recovery. Stress becomes damaging not because it exists, but because it never stops. Without adequate recovery, the nervous system burns out. But when periods of intense effort are followed by deep rest, through sleep, breath work, stillness, or even just laughter and connection, the brain integrates the lessons of stress and rebuilds stronger. This rhythm of stress and recovery that true resilience is forged. The best systems are not those that avoid pressure, but those that recover quickly and emerge improved. It's also important to distinguish between stress that is imposed externally and stress that is voluntarily embraced. The brain responds very differently when you choose the challenge. Voluntary stress activates reward pathways even in the face of discomfort. You feel more in control, more capable, and more energized, even if the work is hard. This is the foundation of mental toughness. You are training yourself to step into discomfort willingly, to face difficulty with intention, and to build a nervous system that doesn't collapse when the stakes are high. Stress then becomes not a threat, but a teacher. It reveals where you are weak and gives you a chance to become strong. It strips away illusion and shows you what matters. When you learn to work with it, when you see it not as an obstacle, but as part of the process, you stop running from pressure and start growing under it. Stress becomes the signal that you're in the right place, on the edge of your current capacity, exactly where transformation begins. Purpose is a neurochemical amplifier that shapes how the brain responds to challenges, effort, and adversity. When you have a clear and meaningful purpose, your brain doesn't treat effort as a burden, but as a vital part of a larger story, a story that gives your actions significance beyond the immediate moment. The sense of meaning fundamentally changes the chemistry of motivation, turning simple tasks into purposeful work and transforming struggle into a pathway for growth. Neurochemically, purpose engages multiple systems that regulate attention, drive, and emotional resilience. At the center of this is dopamine, often called the brain's motivation molecule. Dopamine release isn't just about pleasure. It's about expectation and the anticipation of meaningful reward. When your goals are connected to a deeper purpose, dopamine levels rise in anticipation of progress, not just the final outcome. This means that effort itself becomes rewarding because it's tied to something larger than yourself. Purpose activates the brain's reward circuitry, making persistence feel less like a grind and more like a valued journey. Alongside dopamine, other neurochemicals like norepinephrine and serotonin are modulated by a sense of purpose. Norepinephrine heightens focus and alertness, helping you remain sharp in the face of distraction and fatigue. Serotonin contributes to mood stability and emotional regulation, buffering against feelings of hopelessness or burnout that can arise during prolonged effort. Purpose amplifies these chemicals' positive effects, creating a neurochemical environment that supports sustained engagement and resilience. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for executive function and self-control, also responds strongly to purpose. When your actions are aligned with meaningful goals, this part of your brain exerts more influence over impulses and emotional reactions. It helps you resist distractions, delay gratification, and maintain discipline even when motivation wanes. Purpose thus enhances the brain's top-down control mechanisms, allowing you to stay on course despite challenges. Purpose also influences the brain's stress response. Stress is inevitable, especially when you're pushing toward important goals. But when stress is experienced within the framework of a meaningful purpose, it takes on a different quality. The same physiological arousal that might feel overwhelming or debilitating in one context becomes energizing and motivating in another. Purpose reinterprets stress signals as signs of challenge rather than threat. This cognitive reappraisal alters the brain's hormonal response, reducing harmful cortisol spikes and engaging more adaptive pathways that enhance performance. From an evolutionary perspective, humans are wired to seek meaning. Purposeful activity has been critical to survival and social cohesion. When you operate with a sense of purpose, your brain taps into ancient circuits designed to promote cooperation, long-term planning, and goal-directed behavior. This biological foundation explains why purpose feels inherently rewarding and why it has such a powerful impact on motivation and well-being. The behavioral implications of this neurochemical amplification are profound. People who operate with a clear purpose are more likely to persevere through setbacks, engage deeply with their work, and experience greater satisfaction. Purpose helps transform motivation from fleeting bursts into sustained energy. It provides the fuel for endurance when enthusiasm fades, making it possible to force yourself to keep going even when external rewards seem distant or insufficient. Developing a sense of purpose, it is not something imposed from outside, but something cultivated internally. When you find your why, your brain rewires to support it. The alignment of goals, values, and actions creates a neurochemical environment that favors growth, learning, and resilience. In practice, this means that focusing on purpose can be a powerful strategy to overcome procrastination, self-doubt, and fatigue. When you remind yourself why you are doing the work, your brain releases the neurochemicals that help you persist. Purpose acts as a mental amplifier, magnifying the impact of every effort, decision, and challenge. It transforms the grind of hard work into the fulfillment of meaningful progress. Ultimately, purpose is not just a motivational concept. It is a fundamental biological mechanism that changes how your brain operates. It amplifies neurochemical signals that support focus, energy, and emotional balance. It reshapes your relationship to effort and stress, turning obstacles into opportunities. By anchoring your actions in purpose, you harness the full power of your brain's chemistry to keep moving forward, even when it feels impossible to do so otherwise. When purpose becomes the lens through which you view every challenge, every effort, and every setback, it transforms your entire experience. It is not just motivation, it is the very fuel that rewires your brain to endure, adapt, and thrive. In those moments when you feel like giving up, remember that purpose is your neurochemical amplifier, turning struggle into strength and persistence into progress. Anchor yourself in that why, and you unlock a power within that no obstacle can extinguish. Keep going, not because it's easy, but because your purpose demands it and your brain is wired to rise with it.